your awareness of the internet and what it's capable of is entirely dependent on what you're visiting and what you spend your time on.
And when it came to photography, it was like suddenly all of your heroes were accessible and you could read their thoughts and see what they were eating for breakfast.
You just suddenly walk into this world of another person's consciousness and you're just like, wow.
Hey everyone. I just want to start off by saying everybody has different ways of how they work. For me, this all starts with sort of like a list in my phone of ongoing things that I want to photograph. It ranges from specific people, specific events, to like more sort of general ideas like female magicians. For a really long time, Aaron Carter had been on this list. And when he followed me on Twitter, I thought, this is really my moment. But he responds to pretty much everyone else except me, so I got a little snarky and sent him that heartbroken emoji. But then a few months go by, and I find myself photographing Nick Jonas for a profile for Vice. And to my surprise, I find that Aaron Carter is performing in that same venue 2 days later. And so I think, okay, I'm going to do it this time. I'm going to go through a different, venue. I'm going to contact his publicist. And she responds within maybe like a half an hour, and she says, "Oh my God, Amy Lombard, I remember your Kickstarter project. I remember when you were photographing in IKEA and your work is so amazing and has so much meaning. I definitely want you to come backstage and photograph Aaron Carter." And so obviously I say, this is also my project that I had funded with Kickstarter. And so I'm like, obviously I'm gonna come backstage and photograph Aaron Carter. So basically, moral of the story, I feel personally indebted to Kickstarter and the internet at large for making one of my photo dreams come true. Back in December, I started working on a proposal on a new project for a series I'm working on meetups. And if you're not familiar with what meetups are, it's sort of people congregating from the internet around a specific interest. Like for instance, this is a stay-at-home dad meetup. This is a pug pool party that happens on Staten Island every year. And for me, when I started working on this proposal, it really forced me to think about my relationship to the internet. And I sort of genuinely hate myself for saying this, but I'm one of those digitally savvy millennials who has always kind of embraced the digital age since it's been, in existence. I still remember when my mom was horrified when she realized how much time I had been spending talking to strangers in AOL chat rooms when I was like, 8 years old? So for me, I guess what intrigues me most about working on this project is the idea that in 2015, you don't have to be alone in your interests. I guess for me specifically, there was a time when I felt alone in my interests, and that was when I started this journey with photography. Luckily for me, shortly after I moved to New York in 2008, I guess a lot of people would agree that this was really the height of the photo blog. And I found that by inserting myself into these conversations happening online, suddenly I had friends spanning everywhere from Los Angeles to Paris. I mean, quite frankly, it blew my mind. And I think what amazed me most was the idea that suddenly my work was functioning in ways that it wasn't originally intended for, whether that was some digital format or a physical exhibition. Like this photo, for instance, I had put this photo on my Flickr when I was 19 years old. Like to this day, 420 is my biggest traffic day to my website because of Tumblr. Like that's crazy. And this photo has traveled everywhere from like Moscow, Stockholm, Paris, Los Angeles, like so many different places. And so maybe, a few years later, I was a senior in college at FIT, and I can explain this at a later point, but I accepted a job as a social media editor at Time. And to have this kind of job, you have to have a really keen understanding of how the internet works in so many different ways, like how people are going to comment on things, why they're going to share them. So as an internet worker of sorts, I would understand why someone would share this kind of image. And then, it's sort of like a switch in my head when I see someone take my photo and then do something like this to it. And I will never forget this day. I swear I was like red in the face. I was so angry. Because, while it's not a personal thing, it felt personal to me because it's like someone is trying to trivialize the work that I'm fighting so hard for people to take me seriously because it's not normal, whatever that means in 2015. But I try not to harp on the negatives. You know, for me, when this happens to me, a handful of times a year, and now I just sit back and I'm like, you being an idiot just paid like my vacation. Like, congratulations, I don't care. But there's a silver lining, you know, in a bizarre situation of events. This photograph ended up making its rounds on the internet from being on a specific article for a specific millennial-oriented site that you have all visited because of Facebook. And it ended up on a Facebook invite where an editor from the New York Times Magazine was invited to. And she ended up tracking me down because of this Facebook invite because she liked the photo so much. And ultimately, like a week later, I had a meeting there that ended up leading to work. So while I'm angry about the situation, it's like the internet works in mysterious ways. And then 2 years after working at Time, I decided to take a chance on myself. I felt like so many people my age were getting ad campaigns and things like that. And I thought, you know what, I can do that too. So I quit my job, took a leap of faith on myself, and one of the first assignments that I got was to photograph a fashion trend called normcore. And at the time when this was proposed to me, I thought, I don't know what this is. You know, it has not really been visualized yet. And I will never forget being on a date, and I see out of the corner of my eye on, I think it was Fox News, and there's a photo of President Obama, and this terrible voice comes over the microphone. It's like, is President Obama normcore? And I just thought, like, this is like, you know, this makes me feel successful, that this is going to get that kind of attention. So I always say that normcore kind of changed my life, and that's largely because of the digital media landscape, that hundreds of thousands of people were sharing this per day. I mean, even whether they were mocking this or saying it was like the future of fashion this season, people were still sharing it. And I mean, for the first time in my very short career as a freelance photographer, suddenly I was getting dozens of image requests per day. And I swear to you, I still get at least one request per month for normcore since this happened over a year ago. I want to end with just saying that I think that it's really easy in this digital media landscape where everyone is a photographer, quote unquote. I mean, I don't agree with that. Not everybody is a photographer. Everybody has a camera, and there's a difference. For me, if without these social media networks and without the internet in general, you know, I would not have a career, point blank, like simple. So for me, embracing these digital tools to sort of further myself and just share the images that I love most and share the stories that I'm fortunate to get to work on, and just to share my life is something that's really important to me and people who follow my work in general. I think that in 2015, if you're not one to adapt to these kind of situations, you're really just going to get left behind. I never thought in a million years that I would be doing the work that I'm doing now, just because I didn't think that it was editorially viable or commercially viable. But now, like in this situation, someone paid me to photograph this with a phone. Like, I just think that's so extraordinary, and there's so many opportunities to make a living as a photographer in a meaningful way. And thanks to companies like Visco and Instagram, I think that photography is, like, quite frankly, more important than ever. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. That was great. And I'm going to be reading from a piece of paper, so she's making me look bad. All right. It's nice to meet everybody here. It's a wonderful crowd, a lot of people. I'm a little nervous, but I'm going to dive into it. My name is Romke. I grew up far away and wanted to be part of a community. So I got hooked on the internet. I had already been into photography, so I pursued photo communities. I pursued skateboarding communities. I lurked all over the place. Forums, Flickr, all kinds of blogs. I just wanted to be a part of things. I was seeing a lot of photographers, but not a proportionate amount of online platforms with editorial principles to publish their work. There was Triangle Triangle, and some may remember Too Much Chocolate and a few others, but I thought adding another little platform wouldn't hurt. I started a blog on photography in 2009 called Mossless. I soon started interviewing photographers every 2 days. I had about 100 followers, and about 3 people liked each of those interviews. It wasn't easy to spread the word. In fact, I didn't really. I just kept doing it. Slowly, an audience started to grow. Eventually, I met, through a friend, a photographer who couldn't possibly be summed up in a 4-question interview, which was our format for the blog. For his photography, I would try to fulfill my lifelong fantasy of running a magazine. So I wanted to print a magazine and feature just him. His name was Sean Vajezi, and still is his name, in the first issue. And that idea later expanded to include 3 others. So in all, it was actually a book with, 4 books in a box. So in a way, the idea of having 1 photographer per book still remained. And I raised over $4 grand on Kickstarter and went to work. This is actually the box with the 4 names of the 4 photographers. This is an image by Bree Souders. This is the cover of hers. Here's an insert, a spread from Sean Vajezi's book. Let's see, where was I? My partner Grace then joined the operation, and since then we've made a number of small handmade editions and with a few photographers and a handmade second issue at an edition of 100. Then for our 3rd issue, 2 or 3, this is the 2nd issue actually, just to go through it real quick. Then for our 3rd issue, 2 or 3 years after the first and now on view in the hallway in the gallery, we raised over 30 grand. That's this one. Our 3rd issue is titled The United States 2003 to 2013, and it is a dense composition of photographs of the country by over 100 photographers. There's over 500 photographs in it, which we found and requested over the internet. Each image in the book was first online. It was a grand effort to sort through a great amount of photography on a theme and to organize it so that it felt like a journey through the nation. It looks a lot more like a book than our other books do, but its format is still definitely unique. It emphasizes the power of images, photographs, instead of just lauding their makers alone. Now, I got my BFA in art in 2013, actually visual and critical studies at SVA, which is interdisciplinary arts and theory. Last year, I was a bicycle tour guide. Since this book came out, I now work for the New York Times Magazine as a photo editor. It was this last project that got my foot in the door, but I can certainly say that embracing online communities helped me tremendously. I believe the key to the success of our most recent issue of the campaign was that we had already created the book beforehand, and everybody was able to see that it had been made, and we had done the work, and we were ready to share it with everybody else. Now, that's a bit about me. If you're wondering how you might go about increasing your exposure online, I think the most important question you have to ask is not what can I get out of the internet, but what can I give it? This is the crucial part of internet culture that most outsiders don't really understand. Generosity is what makes the internet tick. Not only is it beneficial to the structure of the internet, it just can be very interpersonally intoxicating. I often find myself drawn to those who are generous with their content and those who not only bring new things to the internet, but help shape its structure. After all, the internet is, in a way, a hub of all shared experiences. Permit me to go on a digression. During the age of the Enlightenment, philosophers like Kant believed all people could be freed of the shackles of controlled information. Kant believed that enlightenment can only come out of an aesthetic, and this is a quote, aesthetic condition of the public sphere as an intersubjective space of free discussion not mediated by a concept or a rule. Unfortunately, the time was not ripe for rampant free thinking. And besides, in the following century, the zeitgeist was largely overcome by the intoxicating power of German Romanticism and later modernism, both of which in many ways herald individual achievements. The most problematic aspect of them is that they embrace meta-narratives. Enlightenment does not. I know that's a little much, but let me keep going. The internet is what the Enlightenment philosophers would have wanted. It is our opportunity to foster a new mentality in our culture, one of a new kind of enlightenment. I believe there's more and more people thinking in that mode. Amy was talking about that earlier a little bit. But we're all trapped in a predominantly modernist culture. Online, we are all equal users. Now it's time for that kind of mentality to start seeping into our culture at large. Unfortunately, the power to change these cultural notions rests in the hands of mainstream media, those who disseminate information to the most people. You could argue that this fight's been raging for decades. Well, to be honest, I think it's been centuries. But the difference today is that the internet is, in a way, delivering enlightened principles straight to the masses. In any case, I suppose what I'm getting at is that the internet does not sort itself out, and I felt compelled, as many others do, to do some sorting. But the thing is that the ways we can sort and disseminate only seem limited. I think we're all just beginning to understand how we can use the internet. Jenny McMahon, Director of Graduate Art Studies and former head of philosophy at the University of Adelaide, said in an interview that community is not defined by a shared system of value. It is defined by a way of communicating. When we get the conditions of communication right, then the rest is going to fall out of that, and we'll have the basis of community. We need to grow, and to grow, we need new ways of communicating online. In my essay for our second issue titled Swimming in the Center of the Earth, I wrote that without discourse, talking about what we're doing, art loses density. And if we share our work online, that is the place where we look for responses. But right now, we can't really take part in discourse. We can still only receive likes, reblogs, occasional comments, whatever, nothing that rises to the level of discourse which we desperately need. As the sociologist Nathan Jurgensen has written, the logic of these sites has burrowed far into our consciousness. It's like architecture. Being inside different structures makes you think and talk in different ways. The truth is, we currently have no impactful way of publishing our collective thoughts on contemporary art. We never really have, but we really need it now, and more significantly, it's possible now. Artists aren't inherently great. Art isn't inherently powerful. It's up to us to consider that, not some intern-typed sheet of art speak on the front desk, nor some crap or clap happy critic. With our combined experiences and knowledge, and with a perspective of informative generosity towards one another, I really believe we can attain a new cultural ontology. Now, I'm not saying that with Mossless we've answered that in any way, not at all really. Again, this is a digression. But we are doing what we can to approach our publishing from a much more egalitarian perspective, one that thinks carefully about what is represented in photographs from a perspective of all peoples. And I know that I'm not talking to an audience of web architects. I can't possibly ask you to build the next public fora on art. However, we give power to these structures merely by using them. And we have many choices, and certain websites are great obstacles in our way to grow. Thankfully, websites like Kickstarter are an enormous part of our triumphant advance in this cultural confrontation. Now, I want to return to this question. What can I give the internet? Well, my answer is simply everything but the kitchen sink. Thanks.
Oh, that was great, thanks. So, there we are. My name is Emma Rains, and I am the Director of Programs at the Magnum Foundation. The Magnum Foundation is a small nonprofit that supports photography in the public interest. We support documentary photography that facilitates social engagement and positive social change. I guess today I want to tell you about two things. I want to talk to you a little bit about an initiative that we have called Photography Expanded at the Magnum Foundation, and then also touch on my interest through showing you two different projects about work that transcends the physical, that transcends the physical and digital web spaces as a tactic for forwarding social justice initiatives. So our Photography Expanded initiative was created in order to expose photographers to new tools and platforms to support their social justice-oriented work. We really support the notion that photographers can take their work beyond a singular frame, beyond a static still, to situate their work in a larger framework. such that their efforts contribute to larger systems propelling social change. So to do this, we're running several laboratories, which are hands-on labs where photographers engage with their peers and with folks from other disciplines, and they run through project development exercises, and with support and a little bit of funding from the Magnum Foundation can find ways to push their work and develop prototypes and new forms of distribution. So just some notes from the lab. So this is kind of an example of the kind of project development exercise that will lead photographers through and thinking about how to push their work to advance their work, to develop it, to solidify their objectives, understand what their contexts they're working in, identify the different kinds of needs and existing resources that the projects already have, and then move on to what tools do they need, what tactics, and what kind of action plan do they need in order to push the work forward. So in terms of projects that I feel like are effectively using a tactic that allows their work to exist in a physical space and also in a digital space, and that transition sort of propelling their work forward. I really feel like Emily Schiffer, with her work called See Potential, was really trying to do this. I stole a little sheet that was published in our lovely magazine that we worked on with Aperture Foundation. Emily Schiffer's work, she went into the south side of Chicago, really trying to focus on food deserts and lack of access to healthy food and resources on the south side. She did a work which was a pretty typical documentary project, and it was published in Mother Jones, and she decided, well, this is great, but I really want to do something. I want my work to really facilitate and enact some kind of change in the neighborhood. So she took this work and she collaborated with other photographers, she collaborated with grassroots organizations, and she created this project called See Potential, which was basically working with grassroots organizations to propel community-driven ideas for making positive change in the neighborhood. So she created these installations and a text messaging campaign around them, and basically used the installations to propel sort of like a text messaging poll, and the community leaders could tally all of the text messages that they got and use that as confirmation that the communities believed in these changes. And now, several of these sites were really successful in bringing about transformations, and this project sort of lives on as a way of stimulating documentation in the neighborhood. Photographers are running workshops with local photographers who are then going to show their work in salons, and then they use these salons as sites for further conversations with the community, and the community will then maybe pick photographs to then use in other installations. And I guess what I want to say about this project is that Emily is really creating a framework, and the art really is within the frameworks and that she's setting up for social engagement. She's making pathways for these social interactions to happen. So another photographer that I like to talk about is Pete Pin. He's working on a project that is about Cambodian diaspora community in the United States. And he himself is part of this community, and one of the things he really sees is that there needs to be more dialogue between the generations. There's a lot of memory and trauma that's translated, intergenerational trauma, and that it's not talked about. And he wanted to really do something, use his work to sort of create a site where young people can engage creatively and actively with with each other and with their older generations. So he's creating some portraits and collecting ephemera. So he did this work himself. He made these portraits and collected the ephemera, but he thought, well, okay, maybe I can create a place where I can work with young people to encourage them to collect their own stories from their own elders and collect ephemera from their own family. And he had this really interesting experience where he was like, okay, I'm going to create this platform. And it's going to be this beautiful thing where, you know, you see just like a multiplicity of stories all in one space. And he had this realization that the idea that, like, if you build it, they will come. You know, that doesn't really work in the digital space necessarily. So he moved into a different mode where he decided, okay, well, we're going to need to use these existing platforms, the spaces where the young people in this community are already engaged in dialogue. And he is just going to go and create a framework and a way for the young community to contribute to these platforms in a more sort of engaging way, directed by the portrait and ephemera model that he was working on himself. So he's done these he's created these workshops where young people engage with their elders. They tell stories through the physical ephemera that they have in their home archives. And it creates these, a mode, an opening of doors for a conversation. And then this work then becomes articulated online in the social networks that the young people are using so often. So it's again an interesting way of taking these photographs and ephemera and work by a photographer that exists very much in the physical realm, but then activating it and articulating it in a digital space creates a larger dialogue. And yeah, that's all I was going to talk about. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Emma. Romke, Amy, would you like to come back on stage? Chris, would you like to come and join us? So part 2 of our incredible discussion, moderated by Chris Boot from the Aperture Foundation.
Thank you, everybody. That's fascinating. I may be the oldest person in the room. I recently came across the minutes of I worked for a cooperative of photographers in London called the Photo Co-op in the early 80s, and I came across the minutes of one of our cooperative meetings where we decided everything together, which is a terrible way to do anything, but and I think the debate had been going on for some weeks as to whether we should buy a computer. But so, you know, the digital world has changed all our lives completely. You're all optimists and idealists of one shade or another. You're all believers in the digital culture making the world a better place, aren't you?
Well, I think that if you're negative about it, I mean, then you shouldn't be doing it. Like, if you feel that what you like, I mean, if what you have to say, if the digital format does not work, I mean, sometimes old media does not work. And I think that in new media, this is really the future. And if you don't adapt, then it's like, how do you keep on going and how do you keep telling your message and get your point across?
But not being able to, I mean, I take the point that you were making that if you're not engaged with digital media, you're really limited in who you're speaking to and who you're reaching. So there's a kind of necessity.
Or just like in terms of like making a living off of it. Like if you're not engaging in these platforms, it seems fairly limited.
Well, I mean, you definitely talked about digital culture being, well, you made it sound like it made the world a better place. You're obviously, both of you are using digital media to conspicuously try to use it to make the world a better place. I mean, you're
yeah. I mean, I think I have a healthy dose of skepticism too. I mean, I think I definitely see the way that the internet isolates the course of ideas, that your feed becomes the people that you believe in and the ideas that you already believe in, and sometimes the debate doesn't really happen. Like things like that. I do feel like that there needs to be thought and really careful strategy with these projects if you're going to really use that space well. I liked what you said. It is what you give it. I mean, it's what you give it, and it's also the thought you put into how you're giving. Maybe is maybe important.
Another thing is that your awareness of the internet and what it's capable of is entirely dependent on what you're visiting and what you spend your time on. I mean, a lot of people, the majority of people who use the internet, only go on Facebook and might travel beyond that from a link, but that's a very particular part of the internet. I would say it's just one building of an entire universe. You know, and I think a lot of negativity comes from people who don't know what's really out there and what's really possible. I mean, nowadays the web is, I mean, I don't really know what the word is, but for lack of a better one, commercialized, and so it's become all about the identity and you know, whether or not you have your Facebook linked to this website or that website, and we forget that, you know, I don't think we forget, but we don't look at what's behind that anymore. And if you remember what it was like before Facebook, before social networks, it was just alleyways and alleyways and alleyways of so much bizarre wonderment and all kinds of things. And I mean, what stems from that is possibilities, really. We just have to, I'm concerned because I think it's very possible for things to go in the wrong direction, but as long as people kind of take it on the right way, in a collective way, I think it is possible. And I think for that reason, we should be optimistic and work towards it.
I mean, you specifically talked about digital culture as a new kind of enlightenment.
Right.
And then you started to describe an idea which I didn't completely understand about some kind of online cultural anthology.
Right.
Can you say a bit more about what you're talking about there?
What I just deleted before I walked in was something about Facebook again, in the sense that I think it kind of is an obstacle for it. But I think in general, otherwise, if you're not on Facebook, you tend to become a unit instead of an individual, and you see everybody else as fellow units in a weird way, and that is just kind of an inherent way of perceiving the world that kind of is more enlightened than, you know, I am interested in this, and that's all I'm going to care about. You know, I think, you know, identity is all about that you form your identity based on your actions, not based on what you choose to represent. You know, I don't know. It's it has a possibility of turning our whole culture into an enlightened one. That's what I guess what I was trying to say.
But you talked. It sounded like you were talking about like you wanted to build something, or you wanted people to build something where dialogue of a different quality could happen. Is that?
I think it's naturally occurring. I think, you know, if you look at this enormous website called Reddit, I think it's the 6th largest website in the world now. The way that the comment structure works, it's fantastic. People moderate each other, and the most interesting, engaging, and informative comments rise to the top. And that's just a collective organization. You know, you don't need a leader for that. That's society working together. It's fantastic.
The thing about Facebook is that Facebook is like that, but they don't do it in a more overt way. Like the way that the news feed works, I mean, it's quite like troubling almost, because it's like these are the things that people are clicking on, and it's like Facebook knows more about you than you know about you. Like what the internet knows about me is frightening. I don't want to know that. So yeah, I guess like maybe that there's a more like, what is the word? Like a better way to sort of make it more obvious and transparent about like, maybe it's a way, because Facebook is really like everyone. Facebook is a larger sort of audience than any other social network or any other digital platform. Maybe there's a more transparent way of doing that.
Maybe there's a more transparent way, but those are the terms of digital media.
Yeah.
I mean, everything you've shared is out there. You know, you're either going to plan your life like Hillary Clinton and you know, delete, manage your digital data in very particular ways. Otherwise, it's available, and you presumably, at some level, will accept that. You just live with it and are comfortable with it.
For better or worse.
Yeah, we're working on a whole initiative right now about that's protecting photography. We're about to do a laboratory that's for photographers who act as activists, and this is the kind of thing we're talking about. It's like your digital trail. How do you protect the subjects that are in your work if you're putting them on the internet? I mean, there's some very serious questions that are emerging and becoming more and more relevant to practitioners, not just activist practitioners, but I think across the board media practitioners who are working with the internet as their form and as their distribution platform. Yeah.
What's the most exciting single thing that has happened in your lives as a result of the opportunities presented by digital media? And you can exclude boyfriends or girlfriends.
Talking to so many photographers, just reaching out to people, communicating with people, having conversations, it's fantastic. I mean, I mentioned in the very beginning that I grew up abroad. I was living in Southeast Asia at the time, and I got just drunk on the possibility of talking to these people I was interested in across the globe. I mean, it sounds corny, but that's the way it was. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess like in a lot of ways, like when digital media became more of a thing, like maybe in like 2008, 2009, when it came to photography, it was like suddenly all of your heroes were accessible and you could read their thoughts and, you know, see what they were eating for breakfast or something like that. Like that was something for me that was like, oh my God, this is so cool. Like I just want more of this. And
I remember when I found Amy's work for the first time, I think it was on Flickr, and you know, it wasn't that big at the time, you know, it's just like it's Flickr, you know? And you just find like Amy's work or other people, you just suddenly walk into this world of another person's consciousness and you're just like, wow, I just stepped into another universe. I don't know, it's mystifying, it's cool. Whenever you find something, that never becomes less arresting, for me at least.
Yeah, I think there's something about the way it facilitates an immediacy in communication that's exciting and also kind of frightening in some ways. But I can remember where I was working in South India and otherwise very isolated from family and home and whatever, and I was able to like every once in a while find an internet cafe where I could actually send photographs, and it was quite an amazing thing that you could, cross the world, bring my people with me, but, on this journey. Yeah.
And on that note, you know, Eric Schmidt, the CEO of Google, is he the CEO? Anyway, he's at Google. He recently wrote that, you know, in a matter of years, the rest of the 6 billion of us are all going to be online, and we're all going to be sharing. And I'm so thrilled by the idea that, you know, maybe next year I'll be watching some farmer in Mongolia upload videos, and I can't wait to watch that, you know. And that's the thing I'm talking about. It's Marshall McLuhan's Global Village. It's finally happening, you know. Or it could, as long as it goes right.
As long as bandwidth.
Right.
yeah.
We haven't talked at all today about the relationship between digital media and communications and physical, the physical offline. I mean, in my world of the photo book, the digital environment has completely driven a huge audience for culture of the making of physical books. I mean, 10 years ago, before the real kind of explosion of digital media, I would say, and this is kind of slightly crude characterization, but it's pretty much true, that 40 people decided which photographers got to make a photo book that got into the world. Now there are tens and tens of thousands of photographers making things, I mean, not always successfully necessarily, but making things and finding audiences and finding form for I mean, and I'm a believer in the book as a great form and as a work of art in the case of photographers. But I mean, what is the relationship between digital media and the physical thing, not necessarily a book, for you?
Okay, for me personally, I mean, there is nothing that I love more in the world than a photo book. Like, if I had to choose between a gallery show and a book, I would choose to have the book experience. And while I think it's amazing that so many people, I mean, anybody can self-publish something that they want to publish, and that's liberating and exciting in its own. However, I personally feel like I've seen so many photo books where everybody thinks that they're an editor, and they're not. I mean,
I'm going to challenge that.
Really? Okay.
In a minute.
Because I feel like I've been fortunate to work with like so many incredible editors who have challenged what I thought a photo book should be like, or what should be, you know, a really important body of work. And then you see things that are just sort of like strung along just for the sake of putting something together and saying like, oh, now I have this book out, like, talk about me type of thing. I guess I'm a little bit jaded when it comes to it, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Well, I mean, having, you know, done a lot of portfolio reviews and the kind of, you know, met a lot of photographers along the way, again, kind of my crew 10 years ago and now, way of seeing things. 10 years ago, I don't think people were good editors. I think photographers, broadly speaking, were not, you know, they were very good at making pictures, but they weren't very good at conceptualizing how they held together in physical form, and they needed help. I think that's completely changed, and that
Do you think that just because of the nature of how many photographs we see,
it's to
or
do
like
with photography education? It's to do with the community of the photo book. It's to do with the online, what everybody learns online about what everybody else is doing. But now I hardly ever meet somebody who doesn't know, who hasn't conceptualized is so clear. And I have the pleasure and privilege of being able to see all the books entered into with Parry Photo, we run this book awards that's kind of particularly aimed at indie bookmakers. And even in the last 3 years, the quality has risen phenomenally. The quality of thought, the quality of execution, the quality of editorial imagination is like rocketing. And maybe this is part of the new age of the Enlightenment, but it's just funny that it takes place in physical form.
Right, yeah. I mean, yeah, okay, just on that note, the idea that we can learn so much about all the different processes that we can put it all into one thing, and we don't have to stick to our lanes like we used to. It's great. But on the thought of the difference between print and digital, for me, I see that kind of the dissemination of an image online or a set of images online has to do with kind of a visual communication. You know, we're sharing the solidarity of experience. I want to show you these images too because I had a great time or I learned something. But with books, it's a little different. It's personal. It becomes an act of possession in a way that you see a book that you identify with, something about it strikes you, and you want it to be a part of you physically or mentally and emotionally, and that's why you buy it. You can have that experience online, but you also can't have the visual communication that you can have online with a book. It's just two different worlds, and they work together so beautifully.
I think photography has this uniqueness as a medium that it can exist in both places successfully, and I think film isn't ever going to have that opportunity to be a physical object in the way that photography will always maintain, and I think that's, yeah, the power of the book will continue because of that unique quality of the medium. And yeah, I believe in that.
How are we doing for time? 1 minute? Is that one? Is it
10 minutes or more.
10 minutes or more to continue before a public discussion? Is that what you? Okay. So, well, I want to pursue this a bit more then, because, I mean, it seems to me at least, that, well, in the photo world, we all thought there was a sort of nirvana in an existence of the thing, that the product was an thing, and we were all going to stop having physical possessions entirely, which seems a very kind of ecological idea, that we should not need physical things. We can just.
But now we need physical things.
But we do need. I mean, we may be very selective about those physical things. And well, it seems like the digital world is completely fluid. It's like water. It's like you swim in it. You can edit yourself as you go along. Whatever you see today, it's morphed by tomorrow. It's completely formless, or it may have form for the moment you experience it, but it's gone the next moment. Whereas the book, and the print and other physical things, they just have this permanence. Like, and for an artist or photographer who decides, this is how I want this work to be, not just today, but tomorrow and next year and after I'm dead, because that's also what this, it's like I want this work to exist in this way, and that's why photographers put so much thought and effort in making the book exactly the thing that they want it to be. And in the end, these are kind of perfect relationship between the digital environment where you can speak to everybody, reach everybody, engage a certain number of people, get your projects on Kickstarter and get people to commit to it and help make it happen, but then turn it into a physical form so that it can sort of be permanent.
Yeah. It's sort of funny because I was just talking with a few of my friends about like a month or so ago, and we were looking through this book, and it's like, I feel like I'm looking through a Tumblr right now. Like just the fact that it felt so fluid. I mean, that's like an absurd thing to say, but like just by the nature of like the subject of the images, the way that we were viewing it, it really felt like this sort of digital experience that wasn't meant to like function in a book exactly. And I think that goes back to like what you were just saying about the idea of like making a book is such a selective process. Like it doesn't always have to function in book form. But the idea of being more selective about these ideas when we are surrounded by books and so many different self-published sort of features in 2015, the idea of being a little bit more curated and things like that is something that I'd like to see more of.
Yeah. I'm interested in people who are working in this space that's somewhere between an author and an aggregator, and there's a little bit of fluidity in there, and I think it's a challenge to grapple with your sense of putting your stamp on it, but then opening up your process to be shifted by some kind of democratic process, and I think that's kind of interesting. And I also think like I'm working on a project right now where we're thinking about a book or a publication, but a book as an iterative process that is created in a certain kind of framework, and then it moves to another space and to another community, and it changes and it morphs, and then it becomes something else, and then it changes and morphs, and it is kind of like it is a book or a publication or a thing, but it's something. It's a form that's maybe closer. It may exist in a physical object, but it may become closer to something that's influenced by the internet's malleability.
But that's another thing that seems to sort of be establishing itself, as far as I can see, is that projects, they exist in multiple ways. They exist online. They exist through a process. People engage their subjects, find their subjects online, or the online world plays a huge role in the kind of creation of a work, of the dissemination of that work while it's made. It's the narrative, the evolving narrative of the work, but then it finds form eventually in a book. It's like it all leads to a book. And
Which I think you can disrupt that process, and it could be a book that then falls apart, and then comes back together again.
Well, why? You're trying to make the
because
book
it can.
form like the digital media form, which is this fluid thing, when it's the great thing.
That's a good question.
Well, on what we were just talking about, like I mentioned, we do something with Mossless that is kind of different to other publishers. Not too different to other independent, but we try to formalize it in that we only publish things that have already been online, and we try to re-sequence it and try to make sense of it. And that's what we did with issue 3 especially. We tried to approach that problem precisely. The thing is, for photographers, young photographers and emerging photographers, you have this awful problem where you both want to increase your exposure, but you also don't want to put your photos online because then you can't publish them anymore. Most publishers, magazines, and most book publishers, they will not touch anything that has been online. So how do you, both increase your exposure and hide your best work? It's a horrible problem. So we want to step in there and kind of, I don't know, not rescue, but find those personal works that got published online and can't go anywhere else, and in essence are kind of only helped along in blogs. They get, they rise to the surface again, but eventually they start sinking into the archive. It's hard to keep them afloat.
I think
so we try to.
The reverse is true. Surely, the reverse is true. That the work, and this is very much about what your practice is about. That work gets attention online, and that drives interest in it in print.
I think to a certain caliber. Like, for instance, like the New York Times Magazine, the first time I met with one of the photographers there, they're like, do not put anything online. If you're like, do not show me if it's been online. And I was like, okay, I won't post anything on Tumblr, I swear. Like that kind of thing. But like, for instance, like more mainstream blogs, like what you and I were talking about before, like when you and I both had done Kickstarters, like this sort of national audience where so many different people will pick it up, where like they don't have that sort of threshold where like, okay, we're more willing to post this work that has been out there because we think that other people like it.
There are definitely certain publications. You work for one.
Right.
Would you work on the magazine on the
I work
on
at
the
the
paper?
magazine, yeah.
I mean, the magazine absolutely has a kind of. It's not only that it has to not have been published online. It has to not have been seen by anybody anywhere in the world. Otherwise, they're not interested.
Yeah.
That's okay.
It's
So that's
wonderful.
a particular. But an awful lot. I mean, I'll give you an example. We're just running a Kickstarter campaign at the moment for Doug Dubois' book. I mean, it's actually to help the book in general, but it's to help make this edition of the book that will be given to everybody in the community that he spent 5 years photographing, a copy, their own copy of the book with their own picture on the cover of the book. And the Telegraph magazine is going to do a major print feature because of the interest, because of the sort of swirl of interest around it stemmed from the Kickstarter campaign. We had the same experience with Richard Rinaldi and Touching Strangers, where we ended up in the New York Times, not the magazine, but the paper, you know, a double page, or maybe it was just a single page in the Metropolitan section, talking about this particular project because of I mean, it does seem like, I mean, it's not just photography projects, but generally the world news starts online and migrates in due course to print.
Unfortunately, it doesn't always happen that way. The vast amount of photographers making work these days and starting out, and honestly, there's a lot of really great people now, just coming out of school even, that they don't have that outlet. They'll post their work online and maybe it'll hit a blog, but that's it. And then it disappears. And then they have to keep pushing it through the gates, but that's not what their job is meant to be. I guess what I mean more is, well, another issue is that, yes, it can circulate online and it can be seen by people, but it can be seen by people who are already expecting to see it or expecting to see that kind of thing. Now, the thing with print is that you can bring it in front of people who aren't expecting it. And the thing with web that I hope will change is that too can change that. Important images, or images that can be important, that can rise to the level of kind of a national engagement, can be shared to the whole country. Right now, it's incredibly impossible. It's only the rostered photographers that are already working for the large agencies that get those opportunities, and usually they're just photographing to illustrate somebody else's point already. I mean it's very strange.
Isn't it that aren't these photographers that you're talking about, or these bodies of work,
yeah.
is it more likely the case that the photographers don't speak digital, as it were, or they've not been so, they're not so polished at the way that somebody like you is clearly, you know your way around social media, you know how to capture somebody's attention, and I mean, I clearly things get lost.
Yeah, I mean, you can even make a really beautiful website, but that doesn't mean people are going to see it. That's the thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Also, what like people are going to click on, which is another thing that websites and like media outlets are sort of driven by, this idea of like clickbait. Like, how many times have we seen a Disney Prince gallery? Like, that's just absurd. You know what I mean? Like the kind of things that people are clicking on, the photo essays that go viral, are like sort of questionable. So it does make the medium a little bit like, oh God, like what is being shared right now? It's frightening.
Another thing is that a lot of digital outlets, the ones that are biggest, were just there first. A lot of the largest Tumblrs, a lot of the largest, groups on certain websites, they were just there earlier. I mean, we were on social media before a lot of other people. I don't think Mossless would have grown if I launched it now. I think it wouldn't have gone anywhere. It's also kind of that chaotic, part of that chaos. You have to work strategically sometimes, and not everybody is aware of that. It's very complicated online. It's constantly changing.
Dominant perspectives get heard more online too. I mean, the dominant perspectives are the photographers shooting who have access to editors, and I still think publications are still quite powerful in deciding what perspectives to show. I mean, we work a lot about that on the Magna Foundation, trying to, support voices coming out of marginalized communities, or support support photographers who are working in their home countries outside of the U.S. and Western Europe who don't have the same access to editors or even to the internet. Or I mean, they'll have access to the internet, but like you're saying, it's like the internet forces.
But you're kind of doing training. I mean, you're part of what you're doing is enabling, assisting, educating people to speak digital and figure out how they can work with other people. And you said, one of you said something about, what was it? Sorry, I have to look it up. Oh yeah, we build it and they will come. You were talking about, you built it and they will come. Well, they clearly won't come unless you know how to connect the dots between places, and that's such a, I mean, it's a set of skills and awarenesses, and
it's a network.
Nobody can do it on their own. It's about partner. Yeah. It's about how you partner, and that you are making your job to enable people to partner better. I mean, and that's where photography has completely changed. It used to be a relatively isolated practice, and now to be effective, successful, seen, it's a much more networked environment that you've got to operate in.
What could happen is that, by all means, by next year, who knows, another website could be built that addresses all of these problems in the most effective way, and just all of a sudden we don't have these kind of issues anymore. That could entirely happen.
You might be thinking about that.
Well, I mean, I'm not a coder, and I mean, even coding language is evolving, so who knows? We don't know what it will look like. There's no way of knowing what will be possible even in a year. So that's the thing to keep your eye out for is, well, I would suggest for a lot of photographers, if you see a new kind of social network out there, I would say put everything you can into it if you want, because if you think it's going to grow, because that would be very valuable. Yeah, and I think that will happen. I think that each website that is created is better than the last, as we learn from our mistakes from other websites. Facebook doesn't look like MySpace anymore. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to open up for some questions from the audience. I can't see people. Oh, yes, I can see you much better. Who'd like to start the Q&A?
Hello. Oh, I don't know if it's working. Oh, it is. Hi. You've talked quite a lot about Tumblr. Is that generally like your favourite platform for sharing photographs? Amy's talked about it a lot, and you've mentioned it a little bit.
No, Tumblr is definitely not my favorite platform for sharing photographs. I mean, personally, I think I'd rather share on a community like Instagram or VSCO, just because I feel like it's a more engaged community for the people who follow me. But I think it's such a specific thing from one person to the next. You might feel that Tumblr is more beneficial for you than. Yeah, no, I still like Tumblr, but yeah, it's such an individual thing. What is more effective than the next, at least in my opinion.
Any comments on Tumblr?
No.
I will say something though. I think that I love Tumblr because you can, like anything else, you can choose what you follow. But I think it's unfortunate that a lot of people approach it in the Tumblr tone. When I see an institution, like a museum, post on Tumblr and they just post memes, it makes me so mad. Because what could be so great about Tumblr is if you have this multitude of kinds of voices, and you just get this feed that's very, very, just varied. You have many different kinds of things.
This again is about speaking digital well, and you're, as it were, describing, I don't know, a museum that kind of doesn't get how to do it well, and is not
very different.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like Tumblr a lot.
What's your what is it, each of you, just in one word, what's your personal favorite platform for daily activities?
Oh, go ahead.
I mean, I actually do a lot of my communication with photographers and folks who are around the world through Facebook. It's actually an effective means of communication for people who are, I don't know, because they're already on it and because they're connected to different communities, it ends up being a lot. But I don't know. I don't really have a real favorite, let's say.
I'd say Tumblr just because I use it the most. Maybe beyond that, Reddit, just because of how its comments are structured. But both of those are, they have problems, as every other website does. They're not perfect, but those are the ones I like the most.
As for like my escape from work and things like that, probably Twitter, honestly, because I follow a lot of writers and things that I like on Twitter. But for looking at photography, definitely Instagram.
Yeah, definitely Instagram for me too. Yes.
Hi. I'm so nervous, sorry. Since, as we're talking about tonight, a lot of the online and offline and the relationship between the two with photography, I was wondering if you noticed, as people who work in the photography realm, if there's a decreased value in actual interpersonal networking when it comes to getting someone to look at your work, and if that's good or bad, or if the internet is the new place to do that, or if there's still the same amount of value that there used to be.
I think that's a very good question, because we really haven't talked about the relationship between the digital and the kind of in-person, the people being together. Do you want to speak to the...
Does someone want to tackle that first? I want to think about that for a second.
I briefly spoke about this. I think right now, in person is still the most valuable way to talk to somebody about art. I mean, like I said, I think that we don't have a structure online, a website where we can really talk about work in a real way, in a serious way. And I think that's a real problem for us. I think that that is kind of destructive to the art that is being posted online. It loses the value it could have gained by us talking about it and finding things that we agree on about these works. As an audience, I think right now that's something that we're missing online, and I'm hoping will be built. And because of that, in person is still the best way to do it, to talk about art, yeah. And it probably will always be, for that matter. Well, I guess it depends on if you want somebody's personal opinion or if you want a broad kind of understanding of what the audience at large would think.
I kind of have a strange perspective on this. I mean, I think I work with a really large international community, and I only have so much time in my day to have meetings with people. And I just try to think about distributing the access to my eyes over people who are in New York and have the privilege of being able to walk and knock into my office among people who I might need to connect with on Skype. So I try to really have quality times via Skype. I like the live, I won't really respond to an email in my inbox in the way that I could have an interpersonal Skype conversation, if that makes sense. But I think that, yeah.
Yeah, I think the in-person is incredibly valuable, obviously. I mean, it's a more intimate reaction, you're actually sitting in front of someone and talking to them and looking at the work in a physical way. But that said, I mean, just in terms of the nature of how the internet works, it's more people have reached out to me because they had looked at my work online for so long, and it's that's still a very valuable thing in the way that they digest it in that way. I mean, whether they're just taking 5 minutes to look at my website, or it's something they've been looking at my Instagram account for a few months. I mean, or they're sitting in front of me. They're all valuable mediums, and I think that there's no better, one better than the other, in my opinion.
But it is the case, just as the digital environment and the possibilities of communicating online are driven interest in the book, the physical object. They're also driven up the value of the personal experience. I mean, photography and rock and roll aren't that dissimilar in the sense that the recording may be ubiquitous, easily available, and kind of valueless economically, not
Right.
culturally, but economically, but actually it's helping drive interest in the time spent in the presence of the, the personal experience.
Have you ever published a book without having an in-person meeting with someone sitting with you with a book dummy?
Yes, I have made a decision on a book by seeing something, not knowing who the photographer was, but it doesn't happen very often. Usually it's a relationship, you're right. Yes?
Hi, this is a question for Romke. You guys talked a little bit about the shelf life of a photo online. And Romke, you've seen, I feel like Mossless kind of acts as a solution for that short shelf life online and bringing it into the physical space. And I was wondering, as an editor for Mossless and for your job today, how do you decide what visually should come off the screen and on, into a book?
Oh, that's a hard question. Well, with issue 3, for instance, issue 3 was actually something I wanted to do from the very beginning. I was seeing a lot of photographers shoot their perspective on America, whether it was a microcosm or a kind of a macro look at the country as a whole. And you know, you see these books come out individually, and they have some power, but as a whole, if they were together, they could kind of make a larger argument about the place. And so when you have an idea like that, you know, when I had that idea, I was like, well, first of all, somebody must have done this. And then when I realized that hadn't happened, I tried to do that. The other ones, it's really, we've made some small handmade editions with photographers, and you know, sometimes somebody will reach out to us and we're like, hey, this is really cool, and we have time and we have some money right now, so why don't we just do this? So a lot of the time it's a practical matter. I mean, we really don't have a lot of money, and we really don't have a lot of time either. So sometimes it just is really just timing. But beyond that, things that we think need to be pushed to print are things that we really feel passionate about and need to be kind of fixed into something. And we don't get the opportunity enough. And you said we're a solution, and that's really nice, but there's no way we could possibly be a solution for the amount of photography there's out there right now. We're just a part of trying to be the solution, I guess. Yeah, I think so.
Yes.
I'm going to try to organize this thought. So it occurred to me when you were speaking that and like you just said now, there are all of these other people out there who maybe don't have connections, don't have relationships. They're not going to get a meeting with Chris. Are there milestones or gatekeepers online emerging that are tantamount to the real world sort of brass rings of getting assignments and books, leaving aside sort of digital storytelling projects and people that are doing transmedia?
That's a great question. You mean the value of the image, or like?
Right, because there's so many photographers, right? And what struck me is that everyone's not, like, are we at the threshold where the old standards or the old dreams of publishing with this person or getting into this cooperative are going to become less important because the masses are going to decide their own standards?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's something that remains to be seen. But I think overall, what people assume is that what was happening offline, you know, the big bastions of culture, are eventually going to kind of like translate to the online. I don't think that's the case. I think it's going to be different. I think it's going to start from big bastions to a huge pool. And the pool is going to be a lot more identifiable and easier to navigate eventually. But I think the way in which photography becomes valued will be very different. I think it'll really be by spreading virally, like her photograph of the marijuana chain with the cleavage. You know, that, for instance, as having been seen by so many people, that becomes valuable. Now, whether that translates to monetary value is a different question. But I mentioned Jenny McMahon, the professor in Adelaide. She actually makes a really good argument about what art really is, and that's actually really fascinating. She says it's you know, a unit of social calibration, that the more people kind of embrace a particular image because they feel some kind of resonance with it and with each other as a result of it, that is the work that becomes most valuable. Now, I think that's going to be the case with the internet, the images that are going to, where that happens to them, whether or not that translates to monetary value, that's what will be the most significant. I don't think it'll come through certain barriers.
Shift their thinking in that standard, where they think now my image has gone viral and I can get an assignment?
That seems troubling. The idea of like, because the idea of like images going viral, it's like a lot of them are not. I mean, when you look at like the top shared images of the year, it's like a lot of them are not even from photographers, and a lot of them are not even real. They're just like made up photographs.
I don't know, but I think it's very possible that in the future that credit and compensation will happen in the background. That photographers will be it'll be normal for a photograph not to be attached to your name, that it will just be attached to the people who enjoy it. And that's a very strange thing to think about, and it's very threatening to a lot of photographers, but I don't think it necessarily has to be. And that's what I was kind of talking about, that what our community will look like in the future depends entirely on the structure of our communication.
But just in a very direct kind of income generational way, your practice has been very successful. I think, if I understood you right, you were just talking about the kind of number of requests you get, whether they're from print or that people who pay to use pictures through things that they've encountered of yours online.
So the idea of it belonging to people who look like it, I don't know what my business model looks like. Guess I'll have to figure that one out. But then again, I don't know what things are going to look like in 5 years, and you just have to kind of adapt. And maybe at that point I'll be making films. Who knows? You just have to roll with it and go with how the times are changing. I think that it's not a good thing to be negative and sort of harp on what's hindering your practice. If you don't want to do something, you should just keep moving.
I would say there are more opportunities. There are more diverse opportunities for getting in front of people. There are no monopolies of power the way that they, relatively speaking, used to be, or very narrow.
I think that people forget that you can just email someone.
Yeah, exactly.
Everybody has every editor has their email on their Twitter for the most part. You could just email someone at BuzzFeed or Time.
I stopped using Facebook because I did
you
come
get too
under
many requests?
siege, and I thought I could have quick conversation with lots of people fairly easily, and then I got overwhelmed, and
Facebook
I
also
never went
opens
back.
the crazy gates, I feel like, so.
I think we've got time for one more question. Yes, in the back, in the middle.
So there was a lot of talk about, kind of the transient nature of how things are online, and I just wanted to know, how often do you guys find yourselves going back to things that you viewed before? Because, with the exception of things that go viral, you really don't see them again. And there's certain, social media, like Tumblr has tagging, and there's hashtags on Twitter and things like that, but there's very few tools to really kind of tack down things that you find. Even, you favorite something, but you favorite a million things, so it gets lost really quickly. So do you ever find yourself going back to stuff that you like, or is it kind of an immediate urgency?
Well, those are the things that end up in your physical library because
yes,
you've got interested and now you want to keep it. And actually that, by the way, is a weird thing about photo books. If I confess, it's the case with me and I think a lot of people I know, you buy the book to keep it. You've already looked at it somewhere else. You've looked at it in the store or you looked at it, but you don't kind of look at it at home. You just decided at that moment you made a commitment to it and you're going to have it. And then maybe look at it again in 10 years' time. But sorry, I should let other people answer that question.
I mean, I go back to things all the time. I still, maybe once every few months, it's not even photo related, there was this abstract sandwich paintings. I don't even remember the artist, but I look at it once every 3 months because it just makes me happy when I look at it. So the things that you see that really strike you, it's something that is enough to make you think about it every 3 months. I think that's something that's pretty powerful. So personally, yes, I do it all the time.
I go back to this idea that I'm really interested in practitioners who are authors and also aggregators and collectors and incorporate collections into their work. And I'm curious about practitioners who can do that. I don't really think myself I've been very successful at that. Although I think I do return occasionally to hashtags where I see a conversation in certain social media platforms, and then I'm able to go back and find things that were intriguing, or an idea or an image that I had seen before. So I've definitely done that before.
Okay, well, I think, you're going to wrap up for us. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Kickstarter.